Yes, please start, Nikita.
Okay, all right. Greetings of the day to the August gathering and welcome to this webinar on Impact of COVID-19 on Human Rights and the Rule of Law, brought to you by the joint efforts of Just Corpus, Legalify India and IURIS JURA. I, Nikita Motwani, a law student hailing from Aligarh Muslim University, will be moderating this session. Thank you for joining us today, and I hope all of you are well, healthy, happy, and ready for this nice session. The flow of the session would go as address by the keynote speaker, followed by a QA round, which in turn will be followed by the concluding remarks and vote of thanks. I would like to remind our audience that we will be going live on YouTube, and kindly keep your audios off for an uninterrupted session. Before we proceed further, I would like to succinctly introduce our organizers. Just Corpus is a double-blind peer-reviewed e-journal that provides a platform to students, academicians, scholars, professors, and professionals in the field of law and management to publish their articles, blogs, case comments, research papers, etc., thus bringing various aspects of law under. Next in line, we have Legalify India, which is an organization that has been started with its cardinal motive to help law students and general public enhance their legal knowledge and thus deals with legal news, updates, and other comprehensive information that helps to keep your legal knowledge up to date. Lastly, we have IURIS JURA, which is an e-learning platform that aims at spreading legal awareness and other law-related information. Today, we are so excited to hear from the keynote speaker, a senior advocate and the Additional Solicitor General of India, Ms. Aishwarya Bhatti. She is the first woman advocate from Rajasthan designated as a senior advocate by the Supreme Court. She hails from Jodhpur and completed her LLB and LLM from Jodhpur University, post which she relocated to Delhi permanently to start her practice at the Apex Court. She successfully cleared the Advocate on Record exam in 2006 and established herself as one of the leading counsels in the Supreme Court. Ms. Bhatti, in her illustrious career of over 2 decades, has been highly active in the bar elections and has been elected twice as Secretary of the prestigious Supreme Court Bar Association in 2013 and 2014, respectively. She was designated as a senior advocate by the Supreme Court in March 2019, post which she was appointed as the Additional Solicitor General in June 2020, a position she currently holds. Some of the cases of national importance Ms. Bhatti has been associated with include the Aadhaar case, equal rights for women officers in the Air Force, and rights of women in the Short Service Commission, to name a few. Thank you, ma'am, for joining us. It is indeed our pleasure to have you here. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Nikita. It is indeed my pleasure and my privilege to be with all of you today. First, I must also congratulate the organizers for undertaking such positive tasks and exercises during such difficult times. I think it is critical to understand that at times like this, when the struggle is in mammoth proportions, our personal struggles, our family struggles, you know, when the basic health care, we are all struggling in family, with our immediate family. I think it is important all the more to keep the focus on trying and doing something positive, something that connects all of us, something that is beneficial for all of us. And for that, my wholehearted commendations and congratulations to the organizers. Well, like I mentioned to you earlier also, I am going to, now that we have started this, I am going to request all of your participants or everyone who's watching us today and has taken the time to participate in this interaction. I will request all of you to please raise questions, your points, your comments. I understand that a large number of our colleagues who are watching here today are law students, fellow students of law. So I would like this to be more interactive. I've already told the organizers, I believe this is also being streamed live on YouTube. So please raise your questions there. I understand that the organizers will be able to pull out questions from there and your comments, and let's start our discourse on the basis of more and more interaction rather than a single-sided monologue. Now, the topic that we have assigned for today is a very important, profound, and significant one. The impact of COVID-19 on human rights and rule of law. It is a once in a lifetime global health emergency. It's a pandemic. It's an emergency. It's a crisis that we have not seen in our lifetimes. Of course, we are getting a lot of comparisons from the Spanish flu. Nobody is alive to recount the experiences that the world went through during Spanish flu, but it was exactly 100 years back, and comparisons are made that it is once in a century kind of a pandemic. But what is important to note is that at the time of Spanish flu, though I believe from the accounts that one reads in media, one understands that Spanish flu, though it was wide scale and pervasive, but the world was not as small as it is today. The world was not so interconnected as it was today. We didn't have thousands of flights connecting the major hubs and small hubs of the world, crisscrossing the whole globe in the manner that it is today. Information technology has allowed us to literally shrink the world. Now, with that perspective and that understanding, we have to appreciate and understand that human rights is actually at the forefront of the battle that the world is fighting with COVID. And entire response of governments, of institutions, of persons is with specific focus to the very basic human right, which is the right to health and right to life. That basic human right has become endangered and has become of critical importance in the times that we are living in. The United Nations also recognizes this time to be critical for human rights. And let me give you an example why times like this become critical for human rights. So while the whole response of the world is focused on the very right to life and right to health and healthcare, what is important to note is that when a crisis comes, when a disaster comes, not only does it threaten the human rights of the entire population and majorities, what it really endangers even more is the human rights of marginalized sections. For example, if there is a forest fire or maybe a disease spreads through the forest, you know who is going to be endangered the most? It will be those animals which are already infirm, who are already suffering from, who are already on the fringes, maybe because of their age, maybe because of their gender, maybe because of their health status, maybe because where they lie in the food chain, what is their status in the animal kingdom. On the basis of that is going to determine that how this pandemic is impacting. For example, it's going to impact a full-grown male in a different manner rather than a serpent, full-grown serpent in the forest, in the food chain, their position. or babies, children who are not fully mature, who are not fully grown, who have not understood. So that is this was just a simile for you to appreciate that while the whole world deals with the right to life, those groups of people whose human rights anyways are a challenge every day. So the balance, the focus has to be on balancing the human rights of right of life and healthcare of the vast majorities, and balancing it out with special needs of those groups who are anyways facing more trouble. Now that can happen on account of gender, that can happen on account of your economic status. I think poverty is the biggest thing. When we talk about a pandemic like this, we are talking about hygienic conditions that everyone should be living in. We are talking about living in social distancing. There are lockdowns in so many places, and there are what is advised is now this pandemic is also, virus is also supposed to be the mutated version, and strains of it are at least they are more in a manner airborne, and to some extent, to some level that it's going. So you have to have those areas, barriers and corridors where you can you have access to living spaces and working spaces where you can maintain social distancing. So for example, the right to livelihood of a software professional whose work seamlessly moves into the virtual world, and right to life of a sanitation worker whose work becomes even more critical, and he has to deal with even more unhygienic conditions, whose own living spaces are so critical that he doesn't have the luxury of social distancing where he lives. He doesn't have the luxury of running water to wash his hands every now and then, and access to running water itself is a problem. This is the reality of the vast majority of the world that I'm talking about. So these are important considerations. Now let's understand these considerations with let's try and focus on one at a time. Understand and consider it in that manner. Obviously our understanding will be better. So but before I go into delve into individual human rights, I also must caution, world has also seen a lot of protests in the form of wearing mask is taking away my liberty, maintaining social distancing is taking away my liberty, or these these measures that are taken for public health, mitigating measures, these measures are taking away our liberty to to have parties and to have congregations, to have. You have seen this has happened across the world. It's not just, I mean, we have now been in the pandemic for a year and a half, and we do have the benefit of seeing how the world has responded to this, how different portions of people have responded to this. And people have also compared it. In India, people have compared it with the emergency that was imposed in our country in 1975. So while we delve into the aspect of human rights and rule of law, which is extremely critical in times like this, it is also important for us to understand that there are some issues which are more bogies. There are some issues which are more in the nature of facades. We have to appreciate that not wearing a mask, the liberty of not wearing a mask because it takes away your liberty, is not a real human right issue. World is not, human rights, sometimes we understand, we become our world, our generation has become a extremely conscious of our rights. I think we are by far a generation which is most conscious, most aware of their rights, constitutional rights, human rights, statutory rights world over. As a generation, we are, because of the nature of awareness, we are at that pedestal. But I think we also need to bear in mind and appreciate that while the awareness, consciousness, and due diligence of rights is very, very critical, it is equally critical, and maybe more so in my eyes, in times like this, to appreciate and understand that rights do not exist in isolation. They don't exist in individual silos. Like I don't have fundamental rights and human rights which exist in a airtight silo that nobody, it doesn't get impacted by others' human rights. Human rights by their very nature are coexistent with each other. They are coexistent for all of us, and they are coexistent with mutual duties on the other side. There was one example that one of the Chief Justices of India gave, and he said that, well, I do have a right to move my hand. I have liberty. It's my fundamental right. I could say I have a fundamental right to move my hand. But can I say now, today we are sitting in a virtual platform, but had this been a physical conference, could I move my hand in a manner that I could be, hitting Nikita's nose with my hand and say, well, I have a human right? No, that doesn't happen. It's a simple example, but this simple example is important for us to understand that rights do not exist in isolation. Every right that we have, we can enjoy only if we are mindful of the corresponding duty, the corresponding coexistence of it. And then there can be no comparison of a global public health disaster pandemic vis-a-vis a national emergency imposed by the government of the day, which actually took away fundamental rights that were available to citizens, which suspended the right to life itself. In fact, that was a litigation that came right up to Supreme Court, because right to life, Article 21 was suspended during that emergency, and people could be picked up from anywhere, from their schools, their colleges, roadside, restaurants, home. And because fundamental rights and right to life itself was suspended, nobody needed to give a reason. There was zero accountability. No petitions could be filed in the court. And that was a time when 9 high courts in one voice said that right to life cannot be suspended and the executive is answerable under the Constitution. But the Supreme Court, in the now infamous judgment of ADM Jabalpur, which has not just been, which was completely undone by the legislature itself. But in that ADM Jabalpur judgment, Supreme Court said that right to life can be suspended during a national emergency. And that is how the impact of that emergency was so profound on population that you have interacted with, who was in prison at the time of emergency. Now, bringing you back here to a global, so we have to always bear in mind that this is a global public health emergency. It's a pandemic that we are dealing with. It's not even an epidemic that it's at one place. It's a pandemic. It's across boundaries. It is across regions. It is across continents. Now let us look at some of the important fundamental rights and how they are impacted. We will have to take a couple of rights to really understand how they are impacted before we get into the rule of law. Would be intrinsically interconnected with this, but I am going to take you to the aspect of rule of law while I take you through some of these fundamental rights. So now, first right that is most critical is right to life, right to protect life. Every state, under their own constitutions, under the United Nations declarations of human rights, right to life is the most basic of human rights, the most fundamental of human rights. And that is a right which is really fueling and which is really dictating the response that governments, countries, institutions, organizations are having towards the pandemic. because it is important to protect life, to preserve life. This pandemic, this virus is impacting the very existence of large populations of people. Now, healthcare systems have stepped up. We know, I mean, I can give you some statistics on some of the areas that while we hear every day how for the last 4 nights we have seen, oxygen is critical in this pandemic, is in this second round. Now I'm giving you an example of India, how oxygen, this second surge, because of the mutations probably that the virus has undergone. Before the second surge of the pandemic, the requirement of medical oxygen in the country was in the range of about 800 to 900 metric tons per day. As the second surge struck the country, 900 metric tons to 8,000, 9,000 metric tons in a matter of per day, in a matter of couple of days. Now, liquid oxygen is not an article which can be created very quickly. It is, one, it is its availability. Second is transportation, the logistics of supply. I'm giving you this example because I am aware of some statistics on the medical oxygen in the country. Every government, every industry, every industrial house in the country, small and big, whichever had the potential to produce oxygen, because though liquid oxygen was not produced in such large numbers, I meant medical oxygen, but liquid oxygen is used in several industries, steel industry being one of the biggest industry that produces liquid oxygen, but it was for different proportions. It was not for medical specifications, but the capacity was there. And overnight, they were all mustered, they were all put into place, they were all, they were all requisitioned in a manner that you have to harness, extract as much medical oxygen as you can. You remove the argon and nitrogen that you've added for the purpose of your industry. And let me tell you, the industry responded. This was a collaborative effort that was made. And what happens now with transportation? Where do you get? Because liquid oxygen is something that's very unstable. It's highly inflammable. It is very unstable, and it can explode like bombs. So it's not like your, a bag of grain or a couple of, grain that you can just take those bags and transport them in whatever manner that are existing. Liquid medical oxygen has to maintain its purity, has to maintain, so there can be no, nothing can really soil it, so to say. There cannot be any mixture of any other gas or anything. You can't allow anything to get into it, because this is going into lungs. This is medical oxygen. Then it becomes extremely unstable when it is transported. So what happens? India had never seen the liquid medical oxygen. They did not have the wherewithal and the capacity to transfer liquid medical oxygen in the tankers that it was done. But within a matter of couple of days, the first few weeks, the tankers which were used to carry other gases, they were purged. They were requisitioned again from the industry across the country. And this is not just, one state, or obviously industrial states had this in abundance. They had more of it, but it was proportionately divided on an equitable basis across the country. And these tankers had to be purged. They had to go through the process of purging to be able to carry liquid oxygen. Then the issue came as to whether you could airlift this oxygen, because oxygen was required on a critical basis. Then the scientific and technical know-how was against carrying liquid oxygen for the purpose of faster turnaround time. rail, by road, by naval war machines, submarines, by naval, not submarines, sorry, the warships of the Navy. That is the way the country has responded for the, now I can't, this is not a topic of pandemic response, but what I'm telling you is that the efforts that have been made to preserve life, to protect life, for the purpose of ensuring that right to life. Now what happens? Right to life still is suffering. Right to life is still becoming critical. It is still on life support. It is still in a very difficult position. And while we see the stories of and reporting of how the mutated virus is impacting large populations, now we see a very even more disturbing trend that the impact of the pandemic is moving very rapidly from urban areas to rural areas where healthcare itself is a difficult situation. Now, healthcare system is something that is strained across the world in a response to pandemic, whichever country has seen the surge. And this now again we have the experiential information and learning. Italy, France are countries which are supposed to have the best healthcare facilities in the world. And we saw in the surge in Italy and France, the healthcare system was completely strained beyond its boundaries because the system cannot prepare and was not ready for an emergency like this, where such large numbers of people, and all of us saw accounts of doctors from Italy and France where they were choosing between giving oxygen support and ventilators to young lives over older lives, saying that we need to preserve young lives more. It is very, very unfortunate that when right to life itself has to be, you have to choose between, or you have to make a ration between two lives to administer medical care to them. But now, let me take you to another perspective. I'm sure all of you would have seen, as I have seen, some videos of and some interviews of doctors, nurses, who have been tirelessly, relentlessly, dedicatedly, and literally completely on a string and a prayer this pandemic as doctors, as healthcare workers, in PPE kits, which are inhuman themselves. If you have to wear those PPE kits for 8 hours, 10 hours at a stretch, you can't eat anything, you can't have a drink of water, you can't even go to the washroom, and you are working in conditions where these COVID wards or COVID facilities have to be kept, they have to be ventilated, well ventilated, they have to be well aired. So they're not air conditioned facilities. While in the first surge, we struggled with having PPE kits, adequate PPE kits itself. We did not have enough N95 masks and surgical masks to deal with the issue and PPE kits. In this surge, we have that, but imagine and understand the plight of those healthcare workers, those nursing staff, those sanitation workers who are working in the COVID facilities and ensuring that proper healthcare, medical care is given to them. So their human right also needs to be understood. The caregivers, and not just in wearing PPE kits, they have been separated from their families, their children for days altogether, for weeks and months altogether, because they are afraid of passing on that virus. We have heard in interviews of young doctors, mothers and fathers who have, after coming home, their children wanted to run to them to hug them, but they would not be with their children. They would go to different, and we have heard stories of how in some areas, some of these doctors are ridiculed and shunned in their residential areas, in their residential societies, that please don't come to common areas, please don't come to the vegetable shop. You don't have, they are doing their professional duty, but they can't buy vegetables from home because the whole neighborhood is afraid that this is a doctor, he works in an area where there is virus and he's going to bring the virus, he's going to become a spread of virus, not realizing that they are the gods of today. They are the gods who are allowing us to, who have responded in a manner that we are, we are not as impacted as we would have been, but for these gods who are really gods in white coats and PPE kits. Now let's deal with some aspects of right ensuring this medical care, ensuring the pandemic and virus spreads little. So how this impacts otherwise, on one side, now these are balancing human rights. So on one side you have to, I mean, as nation, as humanity, as a globe, we have to preserve and protect as much life as we can humanly try and preserve and protect. While imposing lockdowns, people could not travel between countries. Then in the second surge in India, we are seeing more localized, statewide, regional lockdowns, containment zones. Societies and neighborhoods are declared as containment zones. This is impacting livelihood, economic activity. Schools are closed, colleges are closed, learning is not there, people are tied up in their homes. You saw, I'm sure you all would have seen the kind of impact that this had on domestic violence against women. Now, again, on the gender dynamics, women uh, are that group of society where, on large, I'm not saying every woman, but on large numbers of women, they have to face the brunt of the domestic violence. So it became double whammy for them. Or for children who could not learn, children who could not play, children who had no access to the tools which certainly became all important for learning. Their whole life was completely turned around. Now, economic activity, I gave you a small example of the economic activity of a software worker vis-a-vis the economic activity of somebody who's on physical interaction. Today also we have people who are delivering things home while we sit in lockdowns, people who are delivering essential items at our homes, whether they are food items, cooked food, or delivery boys in all different forms of essential items that we need. They are working. Or our frontline workers. Now, rule of law has become the next we all saw what happened. One of the most oldest one of the older democracies of the world fell into complete arson mayhem. Rule of law has to be protected and preserved in a manner which is in consonance with preserving the right to life under a pandemic. That looting, arson, and mayhem cannot be permitted. And that is where our frontline workers who are, and we saw, India saw international trouble also. We saw international trouble on our borders. Forces had to be ready. They could not be put to rest because there is a pandemic that is a public health emergency. They had to be completely ready to face any eventuality that the country's defense faces. So that rule of law in that aspect and defense of the country in that aspect are important parameters which have become extremely critical in times like this. So these are, I think I've taken half an hour. I don't want to proceed more. I wanted to make this more interactive. So I think I'm not going to give you examples, but we can understand each of the human right on the basis of these multiple competing factors. Whether I've just given you example of right to life and right to healthcare, that also in brief, but environment, right to mental health, right to dignity of life. Mental health has become the next biggest problem that we as a world has to deal with. So these are, and human rights are not rights which are just rights physical existence of human beings. Human rights, as it is understood in India under Article 21, human rights are understood, appreciated, and understood to cover the contours of everything that is required for a human being to live his life with dignity. So I have not even come to the secondary rights, the right to privacy, right to pollution-free, right to access to justice. In times like this, Supreme Court had to pass directions which were sui generis. Those directions had to be passed for large number of though we are going to be the and people like people who are inmates who are stuffed in jails, literally, where jails are overflowing with double double the capacity that they have, or 3 times or 4 times the capacity in some places. And social distancing again is absolutely, it's a mirage in most jails. They pass directions making these communities and giving broad directions that people, inmates who are suffering incarceration, who are under trials, petty offenses, small offenses, they have to be released on parole. They have to be given emergency bails. They have to be released so as to reduce the pressure on jail system. So on multiple aspects, I mean, we can't even fathom, we can't even appreciate, we are not even alive to the multiple aspects of human rights that need to be dealt with on multiple levels. When a global public health pandemic strikes and endangers not just entire population of the world, but impacts those living in the fringes, those who are already in in disadvantaged conditions because of their economic status, because of their gender, because of their status in the society, because of the profession that they do, because of their access to justice, because of their access to healthcare, because of their access to just as much as running water, because of their access to just as much as a social distance living space. These are difficult times. We all need to stand together and do as much as we can to mitigate and soothe people around us. Thank you, Nikita. I think I'm going to break here. If you have any questions, let's start that.
Sure, ma'am. That certainly was an enlightening and insightful address. I hope our audience would have gained best possible out of it. Now we would like to take a few questions as suggested by ma'am. Our first question pertains to the current tussle that involves Election Commission of India. Though keeping in view the autonomous nature of the Election Commission and its sole authority to decide in matters pertaining to elections in the country, however, extraordinary circumstances demand extraordinary approach. And in the same light, it is submitted that the judiciary did nothing to prevent Election Commission when it contested to hold elections. And now that the damage has been done, the same judiciary has dragged the autonomous body to the court of law and justice. What is your take on this, ma'am?
See, Nikita, these are not questions that have clear black and white answers. These are, it's easy to blame and point fingers at anyone. India is not the only country that had elections. If you were to count starting from US elections world over, the elections that have happened across the world, it is extremely important at the time of a pandemic to have, in democracies, we are dealing with democracies. Of course, we can't even discuss China here. We can't even discuss some of the autocratic countries. There's no democracy. But in a democratic setup, it is extremely critical to have a government that enjoys the mandamus of the people, the mandate of the people, that enjoys it is elected government. And where elections are getting due, there the elected representatives do not enjoy the mandate till they face the exercise of the electorate again. So this is a tightrope walking. It is not like, it is not like clear yes and no answers. Of course, it's easy to blame election commission for having the elections. It is easy to blame the courts today for not interfering at that time. The fact is, Nikita, we are dealing with we have to understand this, always bear this in mind, that this is with the perspective of a global health emergency pandemic, which has been changing its mutations. This is a virus, this is an issue that the world has not seen. I mean, we were certainly, the world was warned of second wave, and now the third wave, and multiple waves are being warned of. We are lucky that the vaccine got developed and got started being administered in the world. But that was, I mean, everything was in a realm of speculation, or in a realm of uncertainty. And the manner in which the virus has mutated, it is not like you can guess, or you can anticipate it with a degree of certainty that you should have put a complete ban. Nikita, we all heard strong voices of the clampdown, how the clampdown in the first round had impacted lives, livelihoods, well-being, and existence of people across the social strata. I mean, miseries of migrants, their families, their children in that round was something that moved all of us. But while we understand that this has to be a very dynamic process, you can't, the experiential learning, the research on this is ongoing. One is learning more and more. So it's easy to say the election commission did elections, and that the judiciary did not hold its hands and prevent it, and that's why it was done. While we have to appreciate that in a democratic setup, the democratically elected government, which enjoys the mandamus and the mandate of the people, is more at times of pandemic, because many times you have to take harsh decisions which will not come down, which will not be populist. It can't be. These are difficult times. This is a disaster management that is being done in the country, in world over. So while it's important to have that, it is also important to bear in mind that there was no there was no clear predictions and with certainty of when the second surge would happen. We heard, in fact, the caution was that winter is going to bring the second surge. And as viruses, enhance with the advent of winter, and people move indoors, that is the time that the second surge is going to happen. After Diwali, we were told that is going to be the time that virus is going to go berserk. It did not happen. And winter came, winter went. All of us became slack, because there was not enough evidence to suggest that you had to get into that level of lockdown for second surge to be blocked in the manner. Of course, in hindsight, it is always, history always is the best judge. That's why they say, because it's when you are in that situation, you have to deal with and respond to that situation with the best knowledge, best know-how that you have of the system at that point in time. But imagine if these decisions were taken by state governments, local governments, grassroots level governance. This year was a time that grassroots elected bodies were in complete, they had completed their tenures, and the constitutional mandate does not permit them to continue beyond 6 months of completing their constitutional mandate. Many studies are saying that the level of penetration of virus in the villages and rural areas this time is because the grassroots governance. You saw village Nigrani committees, you saw all elected representatives being there at the helm of affairs, dealing with the measures that were required, because having a policy, executing that policy and guideline at every level, at the state level, at the district level, at a taluka level, at a village level, at a panchayat level. All this requires elected representatives in a democracy, and these elected representatives have to be those people who have not completed their tenure and who enjoy the the mandate, like I mentioned. So difficult answer. It's easy to point fingers. It's easy to just hang people without really, pronouncing them guilty, even without understanding the whole perspective. But understand the whole perspective is what I'm going to urge all of you.
I would really like to appreciate the way you have answered this question. It was a bit controversial, but you position of law measures, according to you, have been taken by the government to curb this situation?
Yes, I mentioned this briefly, Nikita, earlier, and thank you for your compliment on that question. See, we are all students of law. I think the training in law allows us the ability to incisively look at an issue, to break down the different aspects of an issue, and whenever I deal with an issue, I try to break down and bring all the perspectives. You can't have one that will not give you a complete perspective. So as students of law, it is more important for all of us who are professionally trained to look at issues from both sides, from all sides, from the whole perspectives, to also bring those issues, break down those issues for the understanding of our colleagues when we discuss those issues in our families, with our friends, with our colleagues. So that is the perspective. I'll urge all of you to do that, break down issues and then bring them together, and don't pass judgments. Just break them down, bring them together and present a perspective, and then let people who you are discussing it with, let them take a call. Now, the issue of domestic violence is a issue became a huge issue, Nikita, while the lockdown was in place. There was double whammy, so to speak, happening. We saw there were helplines that were set up. I'm not going to get into too much into what the governmental systems were put into place, because at the national level, at the state level, these initiatives have been all in the same direction and NGOs have worked also very well. The helplines were provided, people who were people were reached out through all levels, all tiers, including ASHA workers and NHM workers being used and being marshaled to help women in distress. Because see, domestic violence is not a kind of crime that happens in the glare of the public eye. Domestic violence is an offense that happens in the privacy of homes. It is extremely difficult, and the perpetrators are people who are otherwise in a relationship which is fiduciary, which is a relationship of authority, which is a relationship of protection with the victim. So that makes domestic violence a very different and peculiar kind of offense. Right. Actually, the protectors turn predators for domestic violence, and it all happens in the privacy of homes and of areas which are otherwise supposed to be protecting for women. So that required more people to talk about it. That needed more of these interactions to happen, more voices to be heard, because pandemic was not allowing people to come out and talk. Courts themselves were functioning in limited capacity, and you could not go out of home, or be legal aid was not allowed to go out of home apart from etc. But these helplines, telephone helplines, helped. The NGOs who were marshaled into women and child welfare ministries and departments across the country I'm aware that they have very, very competent and very, very well-meaning and experienced NGOs who are all affiliated with these ministries and departments, and they actually become the eyes and ears. Then there are these ASHA workers, etc. Like I mentioned, there are under the Domestic Violence Act itself, there are these workers. I'm forgetting the name, what they are called. What are these people called under the Domestic Violence Act? Those workers. So I'm forgetting the name, sorry, but these people are there, and they became protection officers. Yes, thank you. My colleague is sitting here. She just told me. So protection officers are notified in every city, in every district across the country. So these protection officers became, that liaison for things to reach out. But yes, it has been a difficult time. It has been even more difficult. But I think we need to support each other, because see, ultimately, Nikita, governmental control, how much can it help for offenses which are happening in the four walls of the homes? I mean, we are all there. So if we can't, if we have to be watchdogs around our society, in our homes and with our families, we all are in a position at least to say things in close groups of friends, close group of family, and make sure that it does not happen in our families. So I think as citizens, we needed to step up. We need to step up more than anything else.
Absolutely, ma'am. Next in line, we have a question that says, there have been several reports of police high-handedness, beating with lathis and resorting to public humiliation to enforce the lockdown. Do you perceive this as a right approach to be adopted? A follow-up to the same question reads as, what role should local authorities play to ensure the rule of law in their areas during lockdown? They think that covering mask is their restriction of freedom. Party is their restriction. So can you please relate and answer that question?
Nikita, you are asking me leading questions, I must tell you. And if this was a cross examination, this was impermissible. But thankfully, this is not a cross examination, and you can permitted to ask leading questions. But that's not that's not what I really said in the first occasion. Not all of us, of people who are extremely aware of our rights, but the awareness of duties and awareness of coexistence of rights is something that we need to enhance more. And that, that is a very small population that I mentioned, that who feels that not wearing masks or not being allowed to go out, or having restrictions on their congregations, parties, etc. That's a very small. I would be belittling and berating the formidable contributions of large populations of the world if I was to say that all of us were like that. No, that's not the way it has been. In fact, the only reason why we have been able to fight a pandemic of this magnitude with this much of ferocity is because of support of people. After all, governments can lay down policies, can intervene on institutional levels. But let me tell you, Nikita, nothing can happen if the population is not determined and not convinced that this is for their best interest, and determined to assist or aid those, for example, child marriage. It has been illegal in India to do child marriage for the last 50-60 years. There is a punishment that is prescribed for it. But does it stop? Has it stopped for 50-60 years? No, it has not. I mean, I'm not even talking about offenses like murder. Murders also haven't stopped, despite those being offenses under the penal code. But that is an aberration, I would say. But issues like child marriages, they won't stop unless the population is ready, unless the masses believe that it can be addressed. So pandemic response is also something That is why you saw awareness, you saw role models, leaders, actors being requisitioned and being requested and asked to, be part of that whole awareness campaign. In different aspects and different modalities being adopted: television, telephones, messages on newspapers, and other awareness campaigns, and audio and video mediums. So that was one aspect of it. And secondly, the other aspect of it was to ensure that rule of law has to be there. So excesses, can you hear me, Nikita? Yeah?
Yes, ma'am, absolutely.
Yes. So see, our rule of law does not permit the use of third degree measures, but force is always permitted to be used for the purpose of law and order. For the purpose of maintaining rule of law, you cannot allow arson, or you cannot allow violation of law. See, law and rule of law is to be maintained. I mean, you have to go back to the Bentham's theory. The good of the largest number of people. If there are some aberrations, some exceptions who want to break that rule, which is endangering larger good, then force can be used, but that force has to be commensurate with the degree that is required to be used, absolutely necessary to be used for the purpose of curtailing that aberration, that obstruction of rule of law. Actually, like on a smaller scale, if you understand, it is actually a lot like private defense. Right of private defense, I mean, you are not allowed to kill anybody, but while exercising your right of private defense, you can use force, which can go to the extent of causing death of a person, if it is necessary for the purpose of private defense. So these, and when you're talking about police authorities, of course, police excesses happen across the world. I'm not even saying, we just discussed the George Floyd. Police atrocities and police extremities happen across the world, and India is no exception. In fact, in our country, it happens with even more rampantness, if I can say that. But our rule of law is robust. The mechanism of accountability is robust. Their answerability in the court of law is very, very robustly put in place. So they can't, I mean, it's not like they can get away with the extremities if they go to the extent of using more force than is absolutely necessary. But there are mechanisms that are laid down there: the tear gas, water cannons, lathi charge. These are all allowed. And even to the extent of using firepower, gunpowder is also allowed. So where you are talking about the police machinery, I mean, while I appreciate and understand that police does indulge into extremities, we also have to understand that we can't again be making police the fall guy. I mean, if there is a system in place, if there is a regulation in place that you can't go out and you can't indulge in those activities, you can't congregate for the purpose of a public health pandemic, why should you not be held accountable? I mean, accountability of institutions and police mechanism is fine. What about the accountabilities of those individuals and those group of persons who are hell-bent on breaking and breaking it for the larger public good? So that's their job. Police machinery, that's their job. Not excesses, but a rule of law is their duty. They would be failing in their duty if they do not carry that out.
Absolutely right. We are now taking up the last question, which says, shortage of resources that followed post the lockdown has provided room for corrupt practices, in turn causing further hardships for the common man. And we would like to solicit your comments upon that. And that would be the last question.
Thank you, Nikita. Again,
the type of questions that I'm taking up is because when we law students get a chance to interact to a personality like you, we don't want to leave any stone unturned and gain most out of it. So that is precisely the reason why I'm asking these questions.
No, I am extremely happy. You can see the cheer on my face. Do I look sad or disappointed? I'm very happy. In fact, I called up your colleagues yesterday and told them that let's not keep this a monologue at all, make it as interactive as possible, because I also want to understand how you are thinking, what are your comments, what are your questions. That makes it even better. So whenever I like, and I have a webinar with law students, I like to have it more and more interactive. So I'm happy that you're posing these questions, Nikita, and you're choosing out some good ones, I can say. See,
Thank you, ma'am. The pleasure is all ours.
thank you. So the resource crunch is something that we have, it was bound to happen. You know, when you are dealing with a disaster management of this proportion, of this magnitude, and it is continuing to happen. It is not like it's over. Your question really said that, you know, after the last lockdown, we saw resource crunch. It is continuing to happen. It is going to happen for a long time, because this is a once in our lifetime kind of a problem, hopefully, God willing, and may God have mercy on and bless us all, and, you know, take away this pain and this surge as quickly as he can, with as little hurt and damage and pain. But till this exists, and so long as it persists, it is going to take a long time. People have lost loved ones. We are talking about resources. How will the institutions or governance or the society or us in any manner soothe the pain of people who have lost their loved ones, who have not even been and right to be cremated in the proper manner of their personal beliefs, personal religious practices, is also an aspect of human rights that has been completely violated. I mean, 11 kilometers from New York lies the largest mass public grave that US has ever seen. And it's in Hart Island. They used earth movers, they used these JCBs to make these mass graves, and they had to be buried in a congregation. So resource crunch is likely I mean, it's a natural corollary to a pandemic of this proportion that has seen so many lives being lost, where, you know, essentially you had to impose these restrictions. This is also not a medical issue where you can have people who are caregivers, families are shunning because it's so infectious, caregiving is so difficult, protecting is so difficult. Now, when such things happen, I mean, in the animal kingdom, you have the elephants and the lions and the monkeys to entertain and everything. But you also have vultures and hyenas. Nikita, in society also, we have vultures and hyenas. Those vultures and hyenas want to make a trade of human miseries. They want to trade in the pain and tears of humanity. That is bound to happen. We only have to appreciate that in life, those are the kind of people who are vultures and hyenas, spreading negativity in mind and thought, spreading so much of poison, hoarding black marketing of essential things like oxygen, remdesivir, tocilizumab. These are life-saving critical drugs. I mean, food and all is still, you know, we have plentiful there. We haven't heard too many problems of and the you know the distribution systems, the public distribution systems of the institutions, governments, of individuals. So many langars. I mean, oxygen langar, food langars, churches, hotels, temples, mosques being opened for food, for healthcare, for COVID care. But then there are. Let us hope and pray that we have less and less number of these hyenas and vultures who want to trade in human misery. And let us try and identify them, complain against them, because the machinery, the legal machinery exists, the law and order machinery exists for them to be taken to tasks, for them to pay for their misdeeds. But I mean, that's all I can say, that there is no condoning them. And I think it's all the more important for us to identify such hyenas and vultures and point them out and complain against so that the law can catch up with them.
That was aptly the best possible way one could have answered. Thank you, ma'am, for cooperating with us. I would now like to invite Ayush Pandey, founder and publisher of Just Corpus, to deliver vote of thanks. Over to you, Ayush.
Yeah, thank you, Nikita. I, Ayush Pandey, on the behalf of whole Just Corpus, Legalify India, and IURIS Jura team, thanks you so much, Aishwarya ma'am, for giving your precious time to us and enlightening us with such a wonderful and insightful session. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Ayush, Nikita, and all of your team, whoever is not here from the back end who is doing this. And really, congratulations. You know, I have been telling my colleagues in office also that in this time, if we can do even small acts of positivity, small acts of reaching out, this is going to help, because we are going through very difficult times as a nation. If we stand up for each other, have small, pearls of small, I mean, we may not be elephants moving moving huge resources, but even if we are small sparrows bringing one twig or one sip of water to somebody who needs it, or spreading some positivity in some way, then we are becoming part of the solution. And this is a time that we need more and more of us to become part of solution rather than becoming part of problem. So let's try and become that small sparrow who brings one twig at a time, one sip of water at a time, one grain of one grain of of feed at a time, and that's how we can all come together and beat this. Stay safe, all of you. Stay happy. Invest in yourself. Spend time with your home universities, your parents. Learn from them, from your grandparents if you have them around. Interact with each other. Thankfully, we have internet, the medium of telephones and internet. Stay connected. Stay safe. Thank you so much.
With
Thank you
that,
so
we
much,
come
ma'am.
to an end of this session. Hopefully, you people enjoyed as much as I did. Thank you for lending us your ears. Thank you once again and take care. Goodbye.
Thank you all.